Okay, and welcome to this first project. So I'm going to start off with I would say the more simple project out of all the projects we're going to be doing. And the first one is 3 photos that I took with this bracketing technique I showed you in the first video. I shoot it by hand, I think. No, I think it was on a tripod because it was starting to be a bit dark. So I had a bit of a long exposure. And so here are the 3 photos. This is the normal exposure, this is the darkest one, and this is the lightest one. As I said, I usually do HDR with only 3 photos. If you're on Nikon, you possibly have like 5 photos. And I'm going to show you how to get the best HDR possible out of these photos. So usually what I do before I process my RAW files, because I mostly shoot with RAW files to get the best quality possible, and I will provide, as I said in the introduction, all these RAW files so you can download and train on your own. But the first example, there is no pre-processing to be done. We're only gonna do some, basically just HDR it, go over all the Photomatix settings, and do some Photoshop retouching just as a finishing touch. So to start with, we just select our 3 photos with command and clicking the 3 photos, and then we drag and drop them. As you see, it's like CR2 files, so they are raw files which I drag directly on the Photomatix icon. There is a window opening saying what would you like to do with the drag files. Merge for HDR processing, that's what we want to do, so I click on OK. Then I get the 3 files names appearing and I just click again on OK. Now we get into the first window. The first item says align source image. So you've got 2 options here, by correcting horizontal and vertical shifts or by matching features. Includes perspective correction. I usually go by matching features, so this is a default option. And I just leave that on, I never touch that. Then remove ghost, actually whenever I have this, by default is off. I'm going to put it on because we have some trees in the photo, and whenever you have trees you can get the some blur between when it's going to merge all 3 photos. So to avoid that blur, I would advise you, when you have trees and leaves and things like this, with wind blowing, to click on remove ghost. And I usually go for the automatically settings and I put detection on high. So it's going to do like an automatic job trying to fix the ghost and the blur happening between the leaf on the trees, between the blending of the 3 photos. By default then we have reduce noise, and it says underexposed image only. I usually leave this on, and unless I have a very dark photo, I'm going to put the strength the whole way to 100%. But in this case, I will leave it to 50%. Reduce chromatic aberrations. This is also on by default, and I leave it on. Basically, what chromatic aberration is little lines that fringes you can have around, whenever you have like electric cords, strings, around buildings, basically around any corners or straight lines, you can have a little fringe, usually red or green. This happens due to some lens trouble, and so I always leave reduce chromatic aberration on. White balance, I leave it on as shot, and color primaries based on Adobe RGB. You've got 3 options there: Ace RGB, Adobe RGB, and ProPhoto RGB. If you put in RAW files, I would suggest that you use ProPhoto RGB. Why? Because ProPhoto RGB is the biggest, the biggest space that Photomatix can work in, and theoretically will give you the best result. So, why not go for the best result? So I leave ProPhoto RGB on, and then I click on pre-process, and it's going to start merging all 3 photos. It's going to take a bit of a while, like a minute or 2, and if it's too long, I'm going to put it on pause. But I just want to, you see it says reducing noise. So basically what it did, it took the darkest photo and reduced the noise just on this one. Now it is aligning the photos. That's why it's important to shoot on a tripod, because your 3 exposures needs to have the exact same frame, the exact same position. So then it took out all the ghost problems between the three photos. Now it's reducing the chromatic aberrations, and we're gonna go into what we call the tone mapping. Here we are. This is the tone mapping. Let me take out this window. So that's the main window we're gonna be working on. Just make sure when you start off to always click on default, so that you really start off on a fresh start. So you have two options here. One is called tone mapping, and the other one is called exposure version. Exposure version does not give as the result that I like. I never use this option. I always go for the tone mapping, so I'm not going to go into exposure version. The method used is called detail enhancer. You've got two methods. I find that detail enhancer gives the best result, so I leave that on. Then you have, so let's go into the settings. The first one is strength. By default, it's at 70. I usually always leave it on at 70. Basically, the idea is more you go on the right, more the HDR technique is going to be applied. Color saturation, so let me put this back around 70. Color saturation is basically how vivid do you want the colors to be. I usually don't touch this very much while doing HDR. I prefer to do this in Photoshop once I have HDR the photo. Then luminosity, basically on the right, it makes the photo brighter. On the left, it makes the photo darker. So for now, I usually touch this, but at the end, not at the beginning. Detail contrast, that's a very important setting. When you move it on the right, it's gonna start doing its HDR trick. Basically, it's gonna start adding contrast, but more on the details, giving it a more crisp, a more detailed photo. I usually put this around 80 or 100. I go really on the right on this every time. That is my technique. I'm not saying that's the way everybody should do HDR. I'm saying that's the way I do it. Okay, then we have lighting adjustments. Basically, the idea is that if you go to the right, you get a more sort of HDR. No, sorry. When you go on the right, on the right, you get a more natural feel to your photo, and when you go on the left, you get a more like drone type painting photo. However, I do never use this lighting adjustment. I always click lighting effects modes, and there you get 5 modes, which is a bit similar, but I found the results are a bit different, and actually prefer always the lighting effects. So this is something by default is off. I always turn it on. So this is how it goes. Natural is what you see here. It's pretty natural. Then you've got natural plus, which is, I always go for natural or natural plus. Then, which is basically natural type of result. Then you have medium. Medium starts to get a bit drawy, painting feel like. And then you get into surreal and surreal plus. Now, surreal plus will give you this very, very painting type of look. So for this photo and on all the photos, I like to go into a more natural or natural plus. I always check both of these settings. And for this one, I think I'm going to go on natural. I think that's the best looking for this photo. Then you've got 2 more sliders. First one is show more options, so let's go for it. Okay, smooth highlights. If you put it to the right, what it's going to do, it's going to take out details in the highlights. That's something I sort of never used, so I always put it on the left. And then you've got white point, black point, and gamma. White point, when you go on the right, what it does is that it blows out the whenever the highlight in the photo. I personally, for this photo, it's not working, so I will put it to the left. Black point, when you put it to the right, makes all the shadows darker. This can be useful, but usually I leave it around here. What I do use a lot is the gamma. Gamma is very important because what is gamma? Gamma is the midtones. So what's the midtones? The midtones is whatever is not very light or whatever is not very dark in your photo. So when you put the gamma to the right, you get a very saturated and bright photo. When you go to the left, you get a very more grungy type of look. So detail contrast to the right and natural or natural plus these settings are the three settings I use the most to get the most of my HDR. So gamma, I'm probably going to put it around here. Okay. Next, let's see what other options we have. Micro smoothing, basically, when you put it to the right, it also takes out all the details out of your photo. So I always put the micro smoothing the whole way to the left, because I do want to get, you know, all this the detail coming up. Not going to so much drawing or painting type of look. That's why I've chosen natural. But so micro smoothing kills a bit, you know, this HDR process. So I don't use it that much. Then we have saturation highlights. What this does, if you put it to the right, it's going to take anything which is very light in a photo and put more saturation, more color into it. On this photo, it's kind of working good, you know, because it's putting a little bit of pink on the clouds, because there was pink on the cloud that night. So it's working well for this. Saturation shadows, when you put it to the right, is going to give more, you know, more saturation on the dark part of the photo. It's a bit much here, but around here or around here, I think it will work fine. Shadow smoothness, when you put it to the right, it's going to basically saturation shadow. Sorry, I missed. When you put it to the right, it's going to make the whole photo a bit, you know, a bit more dark, and it's going to make more shadows on the photo. Basically, I usually put this at 0 all the time. And shadow clipping, what this does, this is only useful in on one of the photo we'll be using. This is useful when you have a lot of noise in very heavy shadows. Basically, instead of having the noise, it's going to turn them totally into black. But it's not the case here. So what else could we do on this photo? Now that we have, what have we done? We've put the details contrast to 83. I'm going to put it to 100. Maybe I'm going to put the strands the whole way to 100. No, that's too much. Let's put it back, maybe to 79. I'm going to brighten the whole photo. Okay, details contrast 100, natural. And the gamma, maybe one thing you can do is lower the gamma and increase the luminosity every time you lower the gamma, and it's going to give, you know, give this really kind of nice HDR look that I kind of like. So let me brighten up the whole photo a little bit. Not so bad. Maybe the gamma I went a bit strong, so I'm going to turn it back, and I'm going to completely retouch this one in Photoshop. Micro smoothing, I don't touch. Oh, one thing we didn't go over is temperature. When you put it to the right, it's going to make the whole photo a lot more yellow. Let me put it about around here. And to the left, it's going to make the whole photo very much blue. For this one, let me see what's happening on the right and on the left. Okay, let's put it maybe a little bit on the right, you know, a little warmer, you know, get a bit more pink in these clouds. Okay, so basically I am done HDRing that photo. Now I still need to work on it, but it's only a Photomatix will only give you a start of blending. Then you need to finish off in Photoshop. So once you have done the settings, the main ones we have done for this photo is basically detail contrast, which we put to +100, lighting adjustment, which we clicked on natural, gamma that we went a bit on the left, temperature a little bit on the right, and basically that's it. The rest, oh yeah, sorry, saturation highlights, we went to +94, and saturation shadows +65. To add a bit of saturation on the dark side or light side of the photo. So let's click on process. What this is going to do is going to create a file which is going to be the blending of these three exposure. Okay, here is the file. Now let's save this. So we're going to File, Save As, and I'm going to put it in a folder called HDR, and I'm going to leave the name to you know, it's taking the basic name and the 3 digits, the 3 numbers that was on each file, and then it says tone mapped. I will leave it on TIFF 16-bit because this is what will give me the best quality, and I click on save. Okay, so now we are finished doing the HDR process, so we can go into the HDR file where the photo is there, and we right click and we open it in Camera Raw. Now here we are in Camera Raw with the HDR photo, and let's work a bit on it a bit more. I'm not going to go into all the details on Camera Raw. You can find another applications I did called Photoshop Basics, Photoshop CS5 for photographer, where I go really deeply into Camera Raw. But basically all I'm going to do here is I'm going to boost the contrast. And whenever I boost the contrast, I always put in a bit of fill light, which is going to light up a bit the shadows area. And this is going to give this nice kind of, HDR type of look, Okay, so basically that's all I'm going to do. I did a bit of fill light and I did a bit of contrast. Now, before I open the image into Photoshop, let's go into these settings, which is called the workflow options. If you remember, we did all the HDR in ProPhoto RGB space. So let's keep it in this space and let's keep it in 16-bit. This will make a big file, but you will sure that you will get the best quality possible. So we just click on OK, make sure you've got the right profile and the right 16-bit. Now, if for some reason you don't have a very fast computer like I do, it's a pretty fast computer, it's 16 gigs byte memory, and it's one of the most recent iMac. You can go and use Adobe RGB and 8 bits per channel. This will give you a smaller file to work with. You still will have a very good quality. Honestly, you hardly can tell the difference sometimes, but it will be half of the size. But for this example, I go for the best quality and I don't have a speed problem. So I click on OK. And now that I have developed this file, I click on Open Image. This opens the image within Photoshop. And okay, so, and I'm gonna put in the layers. Here we have the layers. Okay, I'm gonna press F to go in full screen mode, and maybe move this closer so you can see better. Okay, so now that we are in Photoshop, I'm just gonna do a bit of a cleanup on these photos. There's not much to be done. So you see, you have some sensor dust coming up. That happens very often when you do HDR. And the reason for this is that, when you combine HDR photo, all the details, sometimes the dust you don't see, but you will only discover once you've HDR the photo. So I basically click on the layer and duplicate it by sliding it on this icon. And then I'm going to take the healing brush tool. And now the healing brush tool, to work, you need to press on Alt on the clean part and just paint over the spots you want to erase. So clean part and paint, and it's going to erase, whatever dust you have. It's doing a very fast and easy job on that. So let's clean up here. There's a little bit of a wood here. I'm going to take it out. Okay, this. Just a few spots here and there. No big deals. But just to have a sort of a cleaner image here. All right. So, there was one here that I forgot. Okay, so now that I've cleaned up everything, I can go into layers, flatten image. It's going to flatten the image with what I have done. Okay, so basically I'm almost finished with this photo. Now, the only thing I usually go for when I do this type of photo of HDR is to add a vignette effect, because I like to have the viewer, having more attention in the middle of the photo. And the way I do this is I drag the layer to duplicate it. I put the top layer into multiply mode, and then I take the rectangle marquee tool and I do a rectangle. And you see, this is a special rectangle, Anything which is going to be out of the rectangle is going to be a bit dark, and anything that's going to be in the middle is going to be light. But if I press delete right now, you will get a very definite line. It's not very nice because it's kind of a frame. So we don't want that. So Command Z to undo. Then I need to make this selection totally smooth. So I go into Select, Modify, Feather, and I put in a feather of 250 pixels. I click on OK, and then I press delete. Then I press Command D to unselect, and you see it darkened the whole corners of the photo, but way too much. So now all I have to do is drag down the opacity of that layer so that it does it a bit, but not that much. Okay, here. Okay, the next thing that I usually do, I always check, is I do what I call the double curve technique. The way it works is that I create a curve, and when the curve adjustment window opens, I choose medium contrast. This is going to add a lot of contrast to the photo, but usually it darkens too much the photo. Thus, the second curve. I always do a second curve right behind it, where I'm going to change the luminosity of the photo. Okay, then I take these two curves that I select with Shift, and I drag and drop them onto a group folder. And now I can do before and after both curves. Now I kind of like what it does, but I think it does it too much. So then what you can do is lower the opacity of the group itself, and maybe do it only like 48% type of, something like that. Okay, once I'm happy with the contrast, which I kind of am, I'm gonna go into Layer, Flatten Image. I go on a complete destructive workflow here today, but I'm happy with what I have. Now I'm gonna go for getting even more details in the photo, and for this I'm gonna use a simple technique, which I'm going to duplicate the layer. I'm going to go into Filter, Other High Pass. It's going to create, I choose a radius of 3, always between 2 and 3 for high resolution photo. And you will see it's going to create a gray layer where you can hardly tell and see a little bit all the surrounding of the photo. And this I put in overlay mode. And check this out. If I zoom in and I go before and after, it gives a lot more sharpness to your photo. And that works pretty well on HDR photos. So basically that's that. Now sometime when you do HDR, you can have a saturation problem. For example, here it might be a little too much saturated, but this you can correct afterwards. You just add another adjustment layer. Let's take the hue and saturation. This is the window, and this is the main saturation. You can just go to the left. It's going to go to the left. It goes black and white, and to the right, it's going to go vivid colors. I'm just going to put it slightly, like maybe -10 or 15 to the, no, let's go -5. A touch of saturation taken out. You can hardly tell, but just to make it a bit more natural. Okay, so that was the fifth HDR. Now all I have to do is save it. So I go into File, Save. And I'm going to put it into the HDR folder, and I'm going to call this Vincennes, because that's the name of the lake. Vincennes Final. Okay, and I'm going to use LZW as a compression because it's a TIFF file, and here we go. So now once I have saved this file, I'm gonna close this window, and that will be the end of our first project. Let's go into the second project.